Hi, my name's Megan and I work at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, California. We are so excited that you could join us today to hear a little bit about exhibit designs for girls' engagement, or as we like to call it, EDGE. Our team started this work about 8 years ago with the EDGE Research Project, which identified 9 exhibit design attributes that positively correlate with girls' engagement at science, technology, engineering, and mathematics exhibits. And for the last 3 years, we've had a chance to learn what it's like to put those attributes into practice. Today, we'd like to share with you a little bit about what this process of centering girls' preferences in exhibit designs looks like. We'll start by going over some of the big questions people tend to ask when they first start learning about or practicing EDGE. Then we'll talk about the design attributes themselves. And following that, we'll take you on a few exhibit journeys where you'll get a peek into how our developers started to incorporate EDGE into new and existing exhibits on our museum floor and hear a little bit about the lessons we learned along the way. Our hope is that by the end of our time together, you'll feel excited and ready to take EDGE into your own work. Hopefully, you've all had a chance to look at the EDGE Design Attribute Guide and the Guide for Practicing EDGE already. So let's jump straight into some of the big questions that tend to surface for people when they first start to learn about the EDGE research or start practicing EDGE. The first being, why center girls? At the Exploratorium, we first started paying closer attention to gender and STEM engagement while designing an exhibition called Geometry Playground in the mid-2000s. While doing that research, we learned about the gender inequities in STEM engagement in that studies showed a significant gap between girls' and boys' interest in STEM, as well as a disparity in girls pursuing AP Science courses in high school, STEM degrees in higher education, and STEM career paths as adults. Girls were also less likely to visit science centers than boys, and especially as repeat visitors. The shift away from being interested in STEM tends to happen during the ages of 8 to 13, which is why we centered on that age range as being an important time when improving positive STEM experiences might lead to longer lifelong interest. We know that in the long run, improving STEM inclusivity really means embracing a more gender expansive and less binary lens. Given the state of gender inequity in STEM, we felt that studying girls' engagement with STEM experiences is a good first step for moving towards more inclusive and equitable design practices. The next question we tend to get that's related to why center girls is, do we know how EDGE impacts engagement for children that identify as non-binary? And the answer to that question is not yet. For the past 3 years, our focus hasn't been on doing more research with the EDGE attributes. It's been to learn what it's like to put those attributes into practice. What we do know is that EDGE has the potential to improve engagement for all visitors, regardless of age or gender. And we know from the past 3 years that just the act of practicing to center girls' preferences consciously can lead to conversations about gender and design, and conversations about what it takes for design to become more equitable for everyone. During this process, we had conversations about what our dominant design practices are and where they need to start evolving. We also had conversations about how our own gender identities impact the way that we assess, interpret, and create exhibits. It can be really good in these sometimes sticky conversations to continually ground ourselves in a few reminders. First, these are complex topics. It's okay to not know everything all at once. Second, EDGE isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It's meant to illuminate good design as part of a more thoughtful and strategic toolkit for creating welcoming exhibits. And third, we're all learners in this work together. It's the act of starting these conversations, either by learning things by ourselves or talking with our coworkers, that gets the ball rolling on thinking about what it means and what it looks like to create science spaces that is more inclusive and welcoming to people from non-dominant backgrounds that have traditionally been invisible within or excluded from STEM learning environments, like girls. Now, people are usually very curious to learn about whether or not we looked at design attributes that are traditionally thought to engage girls, like color or images of females on exhibit labels. And yes, These were some of the more than 55 design attributes that the original research study looked at. All of these design attributes were rigorously examined using data from 3 different research sites. Some attributes, like color, were found to not be strongly or significantly positive in their correlation with girls' engagement at exhibits. Others, like images of females on exhibit labels, we just didn't have enough exhibits with that attribute as an example for us to be able to conclusively test them against the other attributes. So what are the final 9 design attributes? Well, we'll go over them in no particular order, looking at exhibits that we have on our museum floor right now. And here with us today to show us these exhibit examples is our senior exhibit developer, Sam Haynor. Hey, Sam.
Hi, Megan.
Let's go look at some exhibits.
That sounds great.
The first attribute is multiple sides or stations. Exhibits with more than one side or station allow multiple people ownership of personal space, where they can experience the activity or science phenomena independently or choose to work together. Next, and not unrelated to multi-sided or multi-stationed exhibits, is space to accommodate 3 or more people. These exhibits might have a large footprint or not. What's important is that the design accommodates space for 3 or more people to fit comfortably in a way that lets them all see the exhibit, activity, or phenomenon together.
Next is a design attribute that's close to many educator and exhibit designers' hearts: open-ended interactions. Now, what can be considered open-ended is, well, open-ended. Exhibits with this attribute might offer lots of activities, give different experiences every time, have no right way to use it, or not require users to follow specific steps. Meeting just one of these criteria makes the experience open-ended.
Next up is visitors can watch others to preview. Now, the important thing with this attribute is that the person watching can see the action or reaction of the person using the exhibit, not necessarily the activity or phenomena itself. Getting a preview of what they'll be doing is what makes the exhibit more approachable and welcoming to people.
And now we have a few attributes that come with a little shout out for people who design exhibit labels. If you're watching, these are for you. First up is an image of a person. These images can be a photo, illustration, use drawing, 3D image, or even video. They can show an entire person or even just a body part, like a face, hand, or even an eyeball.
Next are use drawings. A use drawing is not a diagram or drawing of the phenomena itself. Instead, it's intended to help people understand what to do at the exhibit to get started, or make something happen. It might show a person doing an action, or show an interactive element doing something.
Finally, we have the attributes that relate more to the look and feel of an exhibit. We'll start with familiar objects. Exhibits with this attribute incorporate things that most people have seen before. Familiar objects include, but aren't limited to, household objects, kitchen implements, or musical instruments. If you can find it at your local retail store, it might be a familiar object. Though, of course, this varies for different people in different communities.
Next is an attribute that's more of an aesthetic, and that's when an exhibit feels homey, homemade, personal, or delicate. This attribute can relate to the materials or overall vibe of the exhibit, like using wood cabinetry or cardboard to give it a homemade feel, in addition to referring to specific elements, like adding a homey item as part of the exhibit design. When thinking about hominess, it can be helpful to think about, what does homey look like for me? And how might it look for someone else?
Our last design attribute is when an exhibit feels playful, whimsical, or humorous. This attribute can be central to the exhibit experience, or something extra that adds to it. Like hominess, whimsy can mean different things to different people. Our team found it really helpful to look at our own exhibits for examples of this attribute, and then talk about the examples to build a shared understanding of what whimsy means to us.
Edge is not a checklist. Design attributes should be selected for exhibits based on how they meet the learning goal desires for the exhibit and the use experience that the developer wants people to have when they're playing with an exhibit. An exhibit with one carefully selected design attribute will be more engaging for girls than an exhibit that has multiple attributes used just for those attributes' sake alone.
Sam here. back again in the Exploratorium shop. This is where we make, build, tinker with, take apart, and put back together all of the exhibits that are here on our museum floor. Now, when EDGE came out as a research study, that was just looking at our pre-existing exhibits. But the question is, what are we going to do about it? And so we at the shop tried to work on, over the past couple of years, of integrating what we learned from EDGE into our exhibit practices. To see what this might look like, let's stop in on one of our workshops from the beginning of our work with a number of practitioners from different museums working to reimagine this exhibit called Look Into Infinity.
For the design attributes we wanted to consider in the redesign from the original Look Into Infinity was we definitely wanted multi-sided. We wanted visitors to be able to play and collaborate and have communication. So that's why there are two sides. We also felt like this is, by having it on a table and having this great little use diagram, we satisfy that having both people featured and a use diagram, but also from farther away, it's easier to see what you're doing. Yeah, that was pretty much what we wanted to do. And also we have a bright, colorful ball, which is, I think, whimsical. And there's a familiar object, which is, a bouncy ball. So we kind of ticked a lot of little boxes in a very big box.
Yeah.
Wow. In an infinite box. Yeah. Yes. And our drawing is fantastic.
Kind of seeing the top.
The multi-sided, making it multi.
The ice will. Oh my God. I'm scared. Oh, when it comes at you.
No, I know. What we're going to do now is go ahead and take a look at some of those modifications and some of the things we learned along the way. It doesn't always work out. EDGE is a constantly evolving practice that requires all of us participating. Not just if you were a girl once, but everyone together who are in the museum world. So let's go take a look at some exhibits. One of the things we looked for at the beginning with little interventions that we could do is exhibits where we might be able to add just a tiny intervention that might make a huge difference. So one of the exhibits we looked at was water drop photography. I'm right over here where a drop goes into a mug of water, and by the push of a button, a picture is taken right at the moment it splashes. And you capture this moment in time of droplets, of splashes. People who use it can change the exact time, and they can even take a selfie by putting their face on this side. Now, we thought to ourselves, wouldn't it be wonderful to make a little scene in here, create a poolside scene? We did pirate ships, even just simple sea animals. That walrus is obviously too large. But when we tried it out, what we found is it was a huge attractor. People seeing these big scenes of a poolside or a pirate ship. But that actual engagement with being able to place themselves inside the exhibit, of creating their own work and not just being a part of a previously thought out artist's work, actually went down. So while more people came, they actually spent less time here. This reminded me of a tension brought up in that same EDGE workshop from before.
But I also worry that sometimes whimsy can distract from an exhibit, so you have to be thoughtful about when it's used, because I think it would be really easy to make everything really whimsy from a designer point, but then when you're battling with your content experts, they're like, please stop putting kittens on things. I love the kitten, but I could see how that could be a nuisance. But for us, that was, a whimsy nuisance, yeah.
You don't want to compromise the phenomenon completely in order to meet one. You still, you have to have the science and the exhibit there, and then you're trying to figure out what works and what highlights that instead of what counters it.
And so we looked at this actually as a failure of our application of EDGE principles to an exhibit, and was one of those moments in all of this where you try out some things, and of course you have to monitor and look at people to see, is this actually achieving the goals of increasing girls' engagement that we were hoping for?
So here we are in the electricity and magnetism section at the Exploratorium. This hallway right here has more of our motors and coils exhibits, which is one of the older parts of our collection that dates back sometimes to the 1970s. Because these exhibits were built so long ago, they mostly exemplify design practices that were common when we first began building up the museum. So this was an area that when we started the research study, we found that there was lower engagement for girls around these exhibits. And we have anecdotally observed lower engagement with some of these exhibits in general for all visitors. So when we started thinking about what exhibits we wanted to try to refurbish with our EDGE design attributes, this was the section that we thought had good potential to be able to improve in order to make these experiences more accessible, especially for girls.
So one of the exhibits that we were looking at in the electricity section was this one, a stripped down motor. So the idea of this exhibit is that with the push of a button, you could look at some of the basic elements of how a motor runs. Put some coils together, some magnets. And this was built a long time ago in kind of the old style in kind of a physics lab setting. What we realized in studying this is that while engagement was low for many, what also was low is understanding of exactly what was happening. And we realized that while it's stripped down, we can actually bring it more to its fundamentals so that people can really see the very basics of what's going on in electromagnetism. So here we are at super stripped down motor, which is even further broken down and really like one of the activities that we do with our students and teachers in the Teacher Institute. You have two columns of your positive and negative terminals and just a coil of wire in the middle that becomes your motor. As you can see, you have the use diagram, the hand that we were talking about in the EDGE. And you break down the experience into somebody owning total authorship with kind of a delicate, more whimsical feel of what a motor really is. This is just our prototype taken from a table that we had in the shop. We realized that we wanted to expand this further. And from talking to people, what they wanted is multiple stations so that multiple people weren't quarreling over these coils. So we actually expanded with the other EDGE principle of leaving multiple stations and room for 3 people for our final version, which is over in the shop right now. Another electricity exhibit that we looked at is communicating coils. This is another one that's one of the oldest in our collection. You hit a button, completing a circuit in one coil that induces a current in another. It's kind of an amazing effect. It's called the transformer effect, and you actually have electricity in a way transferring signals through the air without being directly connected by metal. You can see that by a compass, a little chain moving. It's actually pretty hard to see the exact effect. It's a little bit lost in this large label with kind of a minimum experience of what we're having here. So we wanted to edgeify this. What the exhibit became, we reimagined it to its core and kind of built it from the ground up. We chose to put it in a familiar bedside table that looked whimsical. And instead of the signal that you see being a chain dancing, we decided that the visitor could put on headphones with a coil of their own, and as they approach this one, they start to hear music. Volume changes as you go to and fro. Hitting this changes the track and occasionally gives you audio directions, and it kind of allows you to boogie. A whimsical open me asks you to open a drawer for further exploration. Jumping the Gap, I think, exposed one of the main ways that we did EDGE refurbishment, which is to really reimagine what is this exhibit trying to communicate and trying to think again how we might communicate that to different audiences. So a lot of the things that we've looked at so far were modifications to old exhibits. But here's an example of a new exhibit that we made with EDGE in mind. When I made this solid to soup, it's kind of an exploration about density by pushing air through sand and seeing the way that it changes, things float or sink. When doing this, I knew everything that I know about EDGE. And while it's not a checklist, I wanted to see how many of the elements I could purposefully, meaningfully put in here. As you can see, kind of an easier one is having a hand in there, part of an image of a person, along with a use drawing about how to use this. The object itself is a bit personal and homemade. This is a sink that I found at a hardware store. The objects may be playful or humorous. You experiment with a rubber ducky in the bathtub, or golf balls or ping pong balls. The entire experience has kind of multiple stations and space for 3 or more people. Now, not all exhibits in any way should have all of these, but where applicable, it was really nice here, and we found good engagement with girls with long holding times, with people who wanted to keep coming back and forth and explore density in this way that felt joyful, surprising, and socially connective.
The work we've done with Edge so far is still just the beginning of making more engaging and equitable, inclusive exhibits. For us, Edge has become a learning and assessment tool that helps us notice and be nudged towards opportunities to make exhibits more welcoming and inclusive. There is so much space to grow in finding new ways to design inclusive science exhibits, and we're so excited to hear about where you might take Edge in your own work to create more welcoming exhibits for your own visitors.